Hello people, Austin50 here, and today this is the first time I'm actually going to cover like a kind of a movie review kind of thing, like not so much just a one film review. I'm going to talk about horror films in general and how they've changed since around the 70s and the 80s to the early 2000s until like now. And obviously, none of you actually know this, but I'm actually a huge horror movie fan. Freaking love horror films so much. I can't get enough horror films. But the only problem I'm in now is the only problem I have is that there isn't really horror films out there which do it for me anymore. Basically, my favorite genre of like horror films were the ones in the 80s and late 70s, such as the Friday the 13th, the Nightmare on Elm Street, the Texas Chainsaw Massacre films, and my all-time favorite film series of all is the Hellraiser series. That was absolutely fantastic in my eyes. Hellraiser 1 and 2, and even 3, they were masterpieces. They were fantastic. And what these kind of horror films did back in the day was they didn't rely on CGI. No, they did. I think it's called practical effects. And by practical effects, it means they do stuff with like plasticine, with like paper mache kind of things, and they use different like chemicals and stuff to make blood and stuff where it makes it look like skin's coming off things and stuff like that. And with today's films, you just don't get that anymore. You with the films these days, the best horror films that are out are the films that use the best CGI. So you could be potentially watching a really good horror film, but if the CGI is absolutely terrible, then the film's going to be terrible and it's just going to be a laughing stock and it's just not going to engage the viewer in any way, shape, or form. Okay? Uh, Another thing I'm going to just say is this is more like going into like the ghost kind of films in horror films. In the 90s, we had the Blair Witch Project. Now, that really brought something new to the table, didn't it? Because it was like documentary styled. I don't know what the saying is, but the way they did it was fantastic. And then it was like a one trick pony. You should have just left that film as it were, but then you had other films such as like Paranormal Activity and stuff like that, which tried to copy it, and it just never fucking worked. Because once you've seen the Blair Witch Project, and then you've watched that a couple of times and you kind of realise that film's actually pretty shit. But it was good when you watched it the first time. So when you watch another film like that, such as Paranormal Activity, for example, where it shows like a camera, then it shows doors slamming and stuff like that. And for God's sake, they brought at least 5 Paranormal Activity films out, even though the first one was just good enough. To a degree, it wasn't actually good enough because it copied off the Blair Witch Project, and all other films which did that copied off the Blair Witch Project. So yeah, so that basically the Paranormal Activity is not scary whatsoever. But don't get me wrong though, the Hellraiser back in that day, that was legit scary, and it was kind of messed up, like your pain or pleasure and all that kind of crap. And then you have like the practical effects, the messed up Cenobites, which like the one with the cut in the throat, the big fat one, the one that chatters his teeth, and then you get Pinhead, and they're all scary. Like you literally in a case like, oh my god, I hope she escapes. Oh shit! And then the second film where they have Doctor Cenobite. Holy shit! Now that was legit. Like, see, I like films that are scary but messed up at the same time. Do you know, like purely fucked up films? Like, what the hell am I actually watching? I love them kind of films. That's really really good. You know, so basically, and same for like the Nightmare on Elm Street, it were kind of good. The practical effects for everything, like when the young Johnny Depp goes into the bed and the blood fires out of the bed, and everyone's like, oh, "What the hell?" And no one believes it's actually, Freddy and stuff like that. They just make excuses around it until there's like one final showdown at the end. Now they did quite a lot of films like this. For example, like Friday the 13th, Halloween, for example. You know, they had like movie after movie. So there's like 10 films of each series, or just shy of 10 or a bit more. Obviously, with the Halloween series, it was originally not meant to be just Michael Myers. So if you watch Halloween, the third film, it's actually completely different because it was supposed to be an anthology. But because everybody loved Michael Myers that much, they kind of brought him back for the fourth film. And then he just continued the series. Okay. And then you've also got the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, where you've got the family. Oh my god, the Sawyer family, they are just messed up. It's like, for example, the girls in the town, the city, all of them, for example, and then the whole like town's in on the like the cannibalism kind of thing because it's like a big city, and it's just super messed up. And Leatherface chasing with the chainsaw, and it's going "Boom," with chainsaw. I mean, holy shit, that is terrifying, absolutely terrifying. Puts them up on the meat hooks, hits them with the hammer, and then you get the old guy. Yes, you know it, the grandpa. And I think we first introduced him. I could be wrong. Was it the second film? The second film with the Texas Chainsaw Massacre films are more of a black comedy. So it was a horror but comedy at the same time. You can tell that when he puts the mask, the Leatherface mask on the girl, and then they're dancing, and then everyone's teasing him, saying that Bubba's got a girlfriend and all that crap, and it turns out it's just like some messed up situation. Holy shit! It's like, what? How the hell do you get out of that situation? Then you've got the guy with the chainsaws, the cop, and he's in the shop. The cop's actually in the shop, and he's there with two chainsaws going, "Doo, doo," you know, as if he's about, as if he knows he's gonna engage in a fucking chainsaw fight. It's just, you're like, what the hell? But I mean, the other films as well were really good. That's a really good film. They're all really good films. I love watching horror films, especially the old school horror films. Messed up. Another thing, like with the Friday the 13th series, it never gets old. The first film, the Friday the 13th series at Camp Crystal Lake, I believe. Actually, the first film, it's actually Jason's mother that does all the killing from like a first person point of view. And then it's only at the end when Jason comes out. But then later on in the film series, Jason ends up, he's dead, he's underground. And then I think is it some shit like lightning hits a rod which is stuck in the coffin and it brings him back to life, and then he's a fucking zombie, and then he's just like a zombie for the rest of it. And then they have like a film called Jason X where he ends up in the future and he's like built like a shit house and he's just killing people in space. And I got a bit far fetched, but it was still goddamn interesting. So yeah, these horror films are the fucking best. Yours got, I don't know if these should count as horror films. I'm going to count them as horror films anyway. The Final Destination series. Now, that brought something new to the table, didn't it, people? Where the Grim Reaper's after you, death is after you, you cheated death, you should have died, now you're going to die somehow. And people just like die in fucking weird ways. That's also a fantastic film series. Really, really good. Fantastic horror film series. And then this is like an early 2000s. This is, and it was only after the early 2000s the film's starting to get a bit shit, to be honest. The Saw films, now they are legit horror films. The first Saw film was, it didn't bring anything new to the table, not really, but it was still a good film where the people are trapped in that abandoned building, bathroom, whatever, and then one of them saws his foot off and crawls away, and then the other guy just ends up dying because I presume he died, and then Jigsaw stands up and it's all been one big game, and then it keeps going on and going on and going on. And then it's the traps he makes, like the reverse bear trap, which rips the girl's face off if she didn't escape. And then it just gets interesting. And it's Saw 2 when they're in the house, and you know they've all got poison and X, Y, and Z, and they've got to try and escape. And it turns out all along that if the cop just spoke to him, the son would have been safe and sound in the safe. But no, it's so intricate, and you're left at the edge of your seat, like, oh, I want to see more, I want to see more, and you do get more. You get about 9 films. All the bad thing is Jigsaw dies at one point, and then he has like copycat killers. I wasn't too keen on them, and they also brought a film out called Spiral with Chris Rock in. I weren't too keen on that either, but they were still reasonably okay. You know, it was okay, good to watch. Wouldn't pay money to watch it, but we're good. And I believe there's a new Saw film coming out. I could be wrong though, but I believe there is. I mean, I've only seen so many Saw films. I haven't seen all of them. It's simply because I just don't want to pay for them. That's it, really. But I presume they're going to be really good. I mean, they have been really good. I'm going to presume that. Another thing I'm going to say is horror films from Japan or China or whatever. Now, they're kind of messed up because they bring something new to the table as well. Like The Grudge, like The Ring, and stuff like that. It always seems to have like messed up characters which are like walking upside down, and you hear all the bones cracking, and they just do mad things. It's like the girl off The Ring, for example. Like, she's like some drowned woman, looks kind of messed up. Person off The Grudge, pretty messed up. The way they actually move, it's kind of weird how the fact how these villains move, it makes it really messed up. For example, there's a film out now called Cobweb. I believe it's a new film, I think. Cobweb. You should all watch it. Now that brings something new to the table. That's pretty good as well. And the main villain of that is, and spoilers here, the main bad guy in that does walk like one of these Japanese horror monsters, so to speak, where she walks all like kind of messed up and shit like that, and you're like, oh my god, I really don't want her chasing me. Oh my god, and you know what I mean. So you don't want that. Yeah. Ba-ba-bam. When it comes to ghost films, for example, this is just me. Like, you lot are all gonna think, awesome 50, you're full of shit. I enjoyed the Insidious films, the first Insidious film. Yes, I did. And when I watched the first Insidious film, that was the first time in a long time I actually really enjoyed like a ghost kind of film, aside from the old school Poltergeist films. Because the monster in that was just pretty messed up. The Darth Maul looking thing with the nails, you know what I mean. And that was just messed up. And then you had that woman, that frigging woman, for God's sake. How terrifying was she? Uh, which possessed the father in the film. Now that was pretty messed up. Then they had a sequel about that, and that was even more messed up, where Elise ends up dying at the end, being strangled. Whoa! I mean, you'd never pay me to go into that world. I mean, if you would save your son, maybe you'd go in. But oh my god, that was horrifying. You know what I mean, people? Horror films, they're kind of good. Some are shit, some are good. Rough with the smooth. So yeah, but my all time favorite film series of all time, it will have to be the Hellraiser series. Now, don't get me wrong. The Hellraiser series, it was only the first three films that were actually reasonably good, and then they ended up being, how do I explain it? Sellouts. They just brought films out anyway because they knew people would watch them. Yeah, and then they started incorporating more CGI, which took away the practical effects look. They went a bit terrible, but you know what? They had a good run in the 80s and early 90s, and it was super good. I really enjoyed the film series anyway. Maybe there's something else I meant to cover. Can't remember. There were definitely something. Oh, yeah. The Scream film series. Now, the Scream films are really good. They are actually really, really good. But the problem is, there's a film called Shriek, I Know What You Did Last Friday, which has Ghostface in. And then the film we all know about, Scary Movie, the first Scary Movie film, which was a parody of other horror films with Ghostface in that. So ever since them two films, Ghostface became more of a laughing stock than being taken seriously as an actual killer. But it doesn't really matter because actually it does. He's not scary anymore. They shouldn't have done that. Well, it's not like they shouldn't have done it. I mean, they did do it, didn't they? So it's one of them. But still, yeah, horror films are amazing. Really, really good. Texas Chainsaw Massacre, Nightmare on Elm Street, Friday the 13th, Halloween, Insidious, Hellraiser, new film Cobweb. Fantastic films. Also, as well, you can't beat the old school Dracula films and werewolf films, for example. Now, they're horror films, but in a different way. It's more like lore horror films kind of thing, like Bram Stoker's Dracula. Fantastic film. I'm not too sure if it really counts as an actual horror film, though, because it's got vampires in or not. It depends how scared of vampires you actually are, I guess. But again, maybe I can't compare a vampire film to a modern day horror film. But for example, the film Nosferatu in the 1920s, now that was actually a horror film, so it's kind of difficult to gauge because a lot of the horror films which have werewolves, vampires, and some kind of monsters like that in, they're generally counted these days as more action films. Yeah. So horror films from that subcategory is kind of now part of like an action kind of film thing. You don't really get that anymore. So most horror films these days, you find they're always going to be about ghosts or poltergeists or something like that. That's really the problem where horror films has actually gone now, because this day and age they don't count slasher films as horror films. You know what I mean? And they act like their own subcategory. So it's kind of difficult now where you want to put these films. For example, World War Z and Night of the Living Dead, they're horror films, but again, they're shoved in their own subcategory of horror films and zombie films. And a lot of zombie films just aren't that scary. They are. They have jump scares, but they're not up on the horror category as they used to be. Horror films these days simply just be ghost films, which there's nothing really wrong with that. As long as you look at horror films as a whole, then you're not, then it's okay. But again, I've seen that many ghost films now. There's not much that really stands out to me. The film Cobweb did do something to me. I liked that film because it was just messed up. You should just watch it. You might think I'm full of shit, but I enjoyed the film because I'm sick to death of horror films these days, simply because I've seen that many. But I just continue to keep watching them because I like horror films. It's my favourite film genre. Okay. I think I've covered quite a lot of ground in this video. This is like my first actual movie review kind of thing. And I hope you guys like it and take what I say pretty seriously, because some of the films I've mentioned are some of the greatest blockbusters you will ever watch. Awesome 50 out.